before you start taking on clients, you need to be in a position to actually be able to positively and effectively treat animals. If you're not sure of what you're doing and how you're doing it, then you really shouldn't be starting yet. So the first thing, I suppose, is to be confident enough in your own abilities, so that you can do the best for the animal and your client. Also, once you are trained and you're setting up in business, obviously you do need to get professional indemnity insurance, and there are insurance companies in most countries of the world that offer that. You do learn and you do improve as you get experience, so you get the experience with hands-on, so it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Once you start working, and once you have your insurance in place, and that you have actually looked at the rules and regulations and the laws that are prevalent in the area where you are, and they vary around the world. So I could say what happens in the UK, but it might make no sense at all if you're in Australia or the United States. So do check on the regulations regarding the treatment of animals and who may or may not do that. You will find around the world that there are various organizations. There may well be regulation in the area where you live. A member of that regulating body who monitor and sort of control activities. There's recourse for the client as well. So if you are in an area where you are regulated, you need to be a member of that regulating organization. If there is no formal regulation in the area where you are, there may well be voluntary regulation of animal therapists. But if there is a voluntary regulating body, then it's a good idea to be a member of that. And they may well offer opportunities for continued professional development. When you're training, you will meet people whose horses or dogs you're working on and practicing on while you're a student. Now, they are your first port of call. When it is that you've actually finished and you've received your diploma, you're going to be talking to those people because they will have other friends and colleagues and acquaintances that they know who also have animals, and they may well be in a position to tell those people just how good you are and that you've helped their animal. There are many ways of starting out in practice and helping to build a business. You're building your business based on the people that you know, the other professionals that you know, so do get in touch with the local veterinary practices and any other groups of people who may well be interested in what you do. So if you're canine, find the local agility clubs or showing organizations, anywhere where there's a group of people. If there's one person to talk to, then go and talk to one person. Don't ever think, oh, it's not worth it, because it very well is, and you just never know what may happen from just talking to just one person one day over coffee. Also, if you are struggling to get started, go and give demonstrations. For instance, I remember even latterly, even now, for instance, if there's a riding club or an equestrian centre or a livery yard, somewhere where there is a collection of people and horses, you could talk to them all you like, and they won't necessarily understand or remember what you're saying. But if you actually just demonstrate what you do, I mean, this is a college which is very much involved with teaching classical animal osteopathy. It's long lever. It's a very effective and successful way of assessing animals' tissue. So if you simply give a demonstration of what you do in order to try and find out what you could do to actually try and help that animal move better. Or if it's a referral perhaps from the veterinary surgeon, it might well be lame, so you might be looking for a site of lameness. But by giving a demonstration of that, you show people what you do. And then whilst you're working, you just give a very simple explanation of what it is that you're doing. And you'll find that people who are, I think most of us are visual learners, we see things and we remember. Somebody tells us something and we don't necessarily remember what it is that they've said. But if you see it happen, then you've got a pretty good chance of remembering. Make sure that people have your name, who you are. So, there are many things that come down to getting people to recognize who you are. I mean, I wear work clothes that have got my name on it and what I do. Very simple, McGregor Animal Osteopathy. But you could have a logo of your own, and having your name on it is a good idea because then people see that. You may not end up working exactly where you think you will, in as much that one day somebody asks you to come and have a look at their dog or their horse, and you treat it, and there's a spectacular improvement in the animal. They then tell their friend who might live 2 hours away or something like that. And the friend then calls you and says, would you come and have a look at my horse? And you might think, well, it's a long way away. Can I go for just one horse? Is it worth it? It is always worth, in the early days, just pushing out a little bit and going and visiting a horse, even at distance. Because that person may well say to another friend of theirs who lives near them, they've just treated my horse and it's actually so much better. And then there's a trainer just down the road from there who hears about you. So you end up having a practice 2 hours away from where you live, with a lot of what we call word of mouth happening. And that's when your practice starts to seriously take off, when people start to promote you simply when they're talking to other people that they know, their friends, colleagues, other competitors at a competition, for instance. So when you think you're struggling to get going, never be disheartened. Just get out there and give talks to anybody who's prepared to listen. And you might be surprised just how things start to take off. Get yourself a very simple website. It doesn't have to be anything spectacular or complicated. You can then develop that later on. And make it more complicated as you develop. As long as people can find out how you're qualified and the fact that you are qualified, your name and how to get hold of you. So you need your email on there and you need your telephone number on there, because you have to be prepared to receive calls from clients. They will ask you questions about whether or not you think it's worth trying to treat their horse. It may well be that you can't or shouldn't treat their horse. It saves you and them time. Quite often you won't know whether you can treat an animal until you get there and start examining it anyway. Facebook, I believe, it is very useful, and many of my colleagues and the majority of my students would be using Facebook for a presence on social media that people tend to look at. And equestrian people particularly tend to use their own local network and their own Facebook groups to talk about what they do, and perhaps it's just to tell a story about how their day is going. But the point is, you're out there and they're seeing who you are and where you are. The other thing is with the canine side, you've got your Facebook groups for the agility clubs or the showing. A lot of people use that kind of social media for giving results in showing classes and things like that. So you go on the show group, you have a look at what's going on. So Facebook's a really, really, really useful form of promotion. I alluded to this earlier on when talking about organizations that you might be a member of, because a lot of them will offer courses on continued professional development. And it is important to broaden your knowledge and to look at other forms of therapy through continued professional development, CPD. The IAAT that I mentioned earlier on, every month would have a dozen or so easy to access CPD courses. The other thing is being able to go out, create your own CPD by talking to other professionals, although we will discuss that, I'm sure, a little bit more fully later on. But if you're talking about a particular condition with a horse and you're discussing it with your farrier or your trimmer, then that is CPD. That is actually applying your knowledge to a situation. And then if you need something else, you talk to somebody else and you apply their knowledge to the situation. So you've now got two ways of looking at the same problem. And there's something that I've done over the years is to actually create my own little CPD courses and do some research. Pick a subject that you'd like to know more about and then research it, read around the subject. That is also valid CPD. You've got all sorts of what I would call newfangled conditions being identified these days, which are all kind of part of traditional conditions. There's nothing new. It's just what we call it or the way we look at it. But with modern investigative techniques, with the veterinary profession, for instance, we find a lot of diagnoses now of high suspensory ligament injuries in the back legs of horses. Now, we didn't used to, but I'm sure we used to have high suspensory problems. But what the vets now have is modern technology to use an ultrasound scan, perhaps, to look at deeper tissue and compare it with what it should look like if it's normal. So we're finding all sorts of diagnoses coming out now whereby it takes technology to find that. As osteopaths, we use our hands and our experience to consider osteopathic diagnoses of problems. We know what tissue should feel like. Therefore, we can compare the left and right legs of a horse, whether in front or back, or we can compare that horse with other horses. But what we do is we build up our own little experience of portfolio of what tissue should feel like, and then when we find something that feels different, we can then decide what is different about it and then try and formulate a plan to heal that. Sometimes it's better to use another modality like physiotherapy, for instance. If you've got a high suspensory issue, then if somebody can use laser or ultrasound or whatever technique they have available to them, then that's probably the best way of dealing with that. But finding out what's wrong and then trying to formulate a plan. And then the other side of that same condition would be to have a look at what's going on with the rest of the horse as a result of the problem that you've identified in the back leg. Horse has been lame for 6 months or a year. It will have changes in its biomechanics, which osteopathically we can examine and make an osteopathic diagnosis of the lesion pattern or the pattern of dysfunction within the whole horse, and then address those other issues, not just the limb. So again, this is where we tend to benefit from working with paraprofessionals, other people who think along perhaps different lines, but nevertheless lines that complement our own. So any form of continued development or education that helps inform us about other approaches to therapy or training or riding or anything you like to do with the equestrian, or if you like, I've just spoken quite a lot about horses, canine activities. We also need to know how to address those and who are the best people to follow up what we do, or how we can follow other people. So being able to find out what other therapists are offering is quite an important part of our continued development. And I think that it's important to go out and find people to talk to and research around the subject. Never get bored of trying to inform yourself and educate yourself about other things. And you'd be surprised how often you'd be asked a question by an owner. And the only reason you can give any kind of answer at all is because you have now a little bit of knowledge about what they're asking. For instance, somebody might ask you about those same deep suspensory problems that they've got in their back leg of the horse, to use the same analogy anyway. If you didn't know anything about the investigation or the etiology or about anything about that condition, you wouldn't be able to give an answer to that client. So the fact that you can give an answer to the client because you researched the subject means that you're engaging with the client, they're understanding how you look at the problem that their horse has, and how the ideas that you may have to treat that animal, even though they might have used or might well use a different form of therapy, they still know your opinion of that. So by being informed, we do give ourselves an opportunity to discuss with clients. So continued professional development, whether it's either organized by somebody else or due to your own research and reading, is mega important. And you should always continue to develop in any way that you possibly can. So that's, I think, of super importance. GDPR is something that's quite important these days. But if you've got client information on your smartphone, and your smartphone is pass protected, you are protecting your client's data. You would never send a client's information to somebody without getting their permission. You may have already spoken to other practitioners and say, if I come across somebody who I think needs your help, do you mind if I send them your number? And they'll go, yeah, sure, of course. That's word of mouth. That's how we build our business. So from the client, from the practitioner point of view, there's not normally a problem with handing out numbers and telephones. I wouldn't offer any private information at all. We don't discuss other practitioners. We don't rubbish other people. We don't talk other people down. We might not want to talk about somebody, but we don't talk them down. That would be totally unprofessional. But client data, therefore, you can keep protected on your phone. Record keeping, that's important because if you want to be able to discuss the case with the owner, with the animal's vet, for instance, if you keep simple records, again, everybody. I say everybody. You can keep a diary. You can have a paper diary, and you can write down exactly what you've done on that day in the diary. Keep your records either in your diary or on your smartphone. You just go to the client's contact page in your database on your phone, and in the notes, put the name of the horse and the date that you see it, and then what you find after that. And then each time you go and see the animal, just add to that bit of information. So keeping records is something which these days is really easy to do. Also, from a legal point of view, it may well be necessary to have evidence of your investigation, your case history, so that you can refer back to that as to what you did and techniques that you used and things that happened on a particular day, and advice that you gave perhaps to the client as well, so that you can protect yourself then a little bit as well. You've got what actually happened on that day, not what somebody thought happened on that day. So record keeping, it's quite important, and the name of the number and the information on that animal would be protected by your pass protected smartphone. I know in the early stages you might want to say to people that come and treat your horse for nothing. That's so that you can then hope or use them to inform other people as to about what you've done. Doesn't mean you charge nothing to all of the rest of the clients as well. You must make a charge for what you do, and it gives value to what you do. It is the other half of the exchange that's happening. You're treating their horse, you're offering the advice, therefore you need to be paid for that. It is how you earn your living. So therefore, make sure that you do earn your living, and don't feel embarrassed about asking for payment. If you don't want to ask for payment straight away, make sure that you do in an email or in some kind of communication, however you do that on your phone, straight away. Don't let it get out of hand. Somebody may well say that they want to, receive a bill at the end. Always be a little bit careful about that, because if they don't pay you, that means there's a lot of work has happened perhaps, and you're not getting paid for your work, and you then got to chase it. I know that may happen quite a lot in the bloodstock in racing, but it's better if it doesn't. So you could also go as far as actually having a form of card payment with you on your phone. That's the kind of thing that just didn't used to exist. But nowadays you can just, somebody can swipe their card and it goes ping, and there we are. Your account has been credited straight away. That's always a nice feeling when you go home and look at the end of the day and you see that your bank account's got more money in it now than it had in at the beginning of the day. That's the business, and that's why we like doing it. It's because people do say, well, you're charging like so. You're worth what you're charging, and we can go into that in a minute or two. Whether it's horses or dogs, I'm sure there's a sliding scale. To a certain extent, it will depend on whether you go to the animal or the animal comes to you. If you're going to the animal, you're going to be taking time to drive where they are, and you're going to be using your car, and you're using more than just the fuel. You may have a lease on your vehicle, in which case every month you've got to pay out a few £100s for that. You want to get that back. You've got servicing and you've got tax on your car. All of those things need to be paid for. So the cost of running a car is probably double what you pay in fuel. So just to getting the money back for your fuel probably isn't enough. So have a travelling expense fee, depending on how far you go. And for that you could actually just put a pair of compasses on your house where you live or where you work from, and put a circle, and I charge X amount to go into that circle, or a bit more to go into the next circle. But then bear in mind also that if you're restricting the area where you work, and some people do, they don't want to travel more than an hour. So they go out an hour to see a horse because and then whilst they're there, somebody else rings them who's at the other extreme of your territory. So you've now potentially got a 2-hour journey, even though you're in your home territory. So if that's no different from driving 2 hours, doing around, as I used to go out, maybe do a day, maybe 2 days, whatever, but see 10, 15, 20 horses in an area, then drive home again. It's no different from the amount of miles you can pile up and accrue in your home territory. So, where the scale of charges, log your miles, and be prepared to charge for the number of miles that you've travelled. The way I used to work was to have an all-inclusive fee that included my mileage, so people were never shocked or surprised. But I knew, because I'd been working for 30 years in that area, that I had 15 horses to see in the locality. So as long as I've got that number of horses to see, I build it into my fee. And I probably don't charge as much as I should now, because most of my clients I've known for many, many, many years, and I don't feel the children have grown up, and I don't have the same requirements as I did. Therefore, I can be happy to charge a little bit less. But I think if you're trying to run a business, you've got to charge what is a fair price for your clients, but also for you. And if we're talking about, well, it'd be very difficult to compare your osteopathic fees with veterinary fees. You find out what your vets would charge just for a consultation. And that's before they do anything. That's just for going there, going through the front door. Then everything else that you do is on top of that. We don't have to do that. We probably know what we're going to do and how long it's going to take us. It's a limit to how much time you can spend with a dog, for instance, before it starts getting a bit fed up with treatment. And when you've got to a logical conclusion with the treatment, you should stop, no matter how long it takes. So your fee will be your fee, whether it's a short consultation or even sometimes a longer one. And you may need to explain that to an owner as well, that when a dog has decided that it's had enough and you are genuinely treating that animal, and you can put your hand on your heart and say, I have just done what I intended with that animal, and the animal says, thank you very much, and just walks off, you have to let it go, because if you get that dog back now to do more, you may find you actually start to undo what you've already done, and you're kind of breaking a little bit of an agreement between you and the animal. So your fee is your fee. So you need to stick to that. And when it comes to setting a fee for a horse, for instance, you've got two ways that you could think about that. One, you could find out how much your local farriers are charging for what they do. You know, they could be 3/4 of an hour or an hour. You also may well take that long with a client. So, you know, you could base your fee on the farrier's fee. They're much higher than they used to be. So everything's going up a bit. But, you know, they're paying for a consultation, not to how long it takes. You could also find out from your veterinary practice how much they charge for A, traveling, but B, for a consultation. Then obviously they are charging more on top of that, and they manage to make it, you know, quite a lot of money sometimes. It's not necessarily going to be that when you first walk in the door. But for you, you've got some idea of how much you can charge, because you can find a way using those two parameters to find a fee that would be acceptable, or certainly that you could justify. That's probably one way of putting it. So what you charge will depend on A, what region of the world you're in, and what other professionals are charging for their work. Quite often, you know, from my point of view, I would see a lot of horses, therefore I could afford to charge a little bit less for each one, or, you know, earn more money. You could, you know, charge a little bit more and just still see the same number of horses. That's entirely up to you how you see it. But as long as you're comfortable yourself, and the majority of your clients are comfortable with your fee, and then that's how much you can charge. In the early days, for me, it was almost the other way around, that I was persuading the owner that they ought to have some maintenance, routine maintenance for their horse. It's a pretty new concept. It's very much an osteopath concept. An awful lot of people are quite happy to get a massage therapist to come and massage their horse these days. They may as well get an osteopath who will create further change, and not just, you know, I'm not trying to put massage therapy or sports massage down there at all, because it's a very, very useful, very valuable form of therapy. But it means that, you know, from an osteopathic point of view, we ought to be able to have the same approach. Obviously, it comes down to how far you have to travel to see the animal. And I used to try and work with horses on a basis of a 3-month routine maintenance program. And for dogs, which are biomechanically different, and the way their bodies respond to the world around them is different, every 6 weeks, especially for sports dogs, agility dogs, somebody wants to keep their dog maintained and working at a top level, then they are advised to have regular maintenance. And if a client says to you, I'd like you to come back on a monthly basis, there's nothing wrong with doing that. You're not going to hurt the animal. It's better than having to persuade the owner that they need to have some maintenance done on their animal, because it's going to be better for the animal long term. But if an owner wants you to go every month, then it's up to you to try and fit it into your diary on a monthly basis. There's nothing wrong with that. You mustn't feel, oh, I can't see you once a month, or I shouldn't see you once a month. Nothing wrong with it. But, you know, keep the client happy. You get professional footballers or professional sportsmen, they might be on the physio's bench every day. So you're not going to do the animal any harm. And if they want you there on a monthly basis, and it gives them the confidence then to compete, jump, whatever it is, as much as they want, then go for that. As long as they're not over jumping their horse thinking that they don't need to worry about how often they go out and compete because you're going to treat the animal. You've got to reconcile the potential for somebody to abuse their animal if you're treating it. But I think that would be very unusual indeed. And it might well be that a racehorse trainer wants to race the horse twice in a week. There's nothing wrong with that either. They're not going to do it every week, but some horses will run better second time in the week than they did the first time in the week. So horses for courses. And when it comes to routine maintenance, you need to just persuade the client that they should have maintenance, and then find a schedule that you're comfortable with and the owner is comfortable with. It does work. I mean, it really is a good idea. When it comes to whether or not you think the animal would need treatment or not, you're not going to do it any harm if you see it. Animal osteopathy is a really good way, as I just said, of maintaining animals, but also preventing things from developing and going wrong. Because there may well be issues which are latent. They are there, but they're not showing up yet. And by going through the mobility testing and the assessment, OAB is both assessment and treatment at the same time. Taking the joint through its range of movements is maybe going to get rid of a problem before it manifests, before it becomes a problem. Therefore, it's very preventative. So, if you don't think that the animal doesn't need treatment, think that it would benefit from as much treatment as you can justify giving it, and it's not a bad idea if the owner's happy with that. The other part of that would be if you have an animal that requires some other kind of follow-up between your visits. You're doing your maintenance program, and you want the horse or the dog doing certain exercises in order to try and maintain flexibility and mobility. Perhaps you're trying to change posture. Animals, just like people, if we don't regularly remind our bodies of how they should be working, then they will continue to work badly. So offering advice as to what people can do for themselves between routine maintenance treatment is also a good idea. But there are circumstances in which the owner may well not engage with your advice. Well, there's really not much you can do about that, except say that, well, if you're not prepared or you can't, I mean, simply it's a question that they don't have time or they don't have the ability, or for whatever reason they cannot give the routine maintenance. It's not just perhaps that they're refusing to give it, it's perhaps they can't. Just then what you need to do maybe is bring your maintenance treatments forward so that you're doing something so that they don't have to. You may find a situation in which you treat the animal, but it needs some exercises in order to see it through. Perhaps in the middle of treating, in the middle of a course of treatment, you've come up with your treatment plan and you're working through your treatment plan, but the owner is not engaging with it. And they may well say that the animal isn't getting better. Well, you just have to stand your ground and say, well, there are certain things that you've got to not fall out over it. But the point is, you've got to say to them that the animal needs reminding of what it is you're trying to achieve between visits, so that instead of it falling back to where they started each time between visits, you make progress. It's 3 steps forwards and 2 steps back. You've got to try and make sure you don't get 3 steps forwards and 3 steps back. Otherwise, you're not making progress. You're not getting rid of the issue. And sometimes it requires some kind of help from the owner to do that. If they're not prepared to do that, then there's not much you can do about it. And in the end, if really you feel that it's a welfare issue, you refer them back to their vet. Say that you're not sure if you can do any more for them. Sometimes that does galvanize people into thinking, oh, well, perhaps this is important. Perhaps it's more important than I thought it was. But certainly you've got to keep your client informed of changes which are happening within their animal, and you've got to put it in a way that they would clearly understand what you're trying to say. If you're using complicated language and and the client doesn't really understand what it is you're saying, then of course they're justified in perhaps not following your advice. But mostly people will. If you've got stuff that needs to be done, most people will do that because they see the benefit to the animal, and most people are interested in actually genuinely trying to help their animals. The other thing that we might talk about, at the same time here would be sometimes you have less is more, and this especially is true with dogs. I did allude to this earlier on, that you might be working with a dog and then the dog decides that it's had enough. I mean, it probably has. Dogs communicate with us in different ways. They're not talking to us in our language, but they probably are talking to us in their language. Not necessarily a bark either. It could be body language. It could just be the way they're licking their nose or yawning or whatever, but they are communicating. And it means something when they're doing that. So there are days when you may well feel, fairly quickly that the animal has taken what it needs and jumps off the treatment table. So there are those moments when the animal has decided, and if you try and get the animal back to do more because you think the owner is thinking that's rather quick, then you're not helping the animal. You're then doing it for the owner's point of view. And you may well actually, as I said earlier on, actually start to undo some of the good that you've done. And, there are little anecdotes over the years when I've had to explain to somebody that you do what you need to do, but then when you've done what you need to do, you stop. You don't just keep going to the bitter end because the client's standing there. And I remember treating a couple of horses for a client, and I'd been treating this lady's horses for many years. And on one occasion, she couldn't be there, so I was able to turn up, treat the horse. I used to really enjoy chatting to this lady, but on this occasion I didn't have to, therefore it takes less time. So I treated one horse, then went across the yard, treated her second horse. And, I put my hand on my heart that I always treated the horse in the way that they should be treated. I didn't used to skimp on things just because the owner wasn't there. That's not the way. You've got to be genuinely truthful with yourself here. Very important. But then the owner of the yard spotted me walking out the yard and said, well, that's quick. Such and such a lady comes in and spends an hour and a half with the horse. And I had to think a little bit on my feet as to how to explain in this situation why I wasn't there still for an hour and a half. And an hour and a half is far too long. When treating with osteopathy, the fact that you've done what you need to do, you stop. And the way I described this to that lady was that I caught her off guard a little bit. I said, well, I used a boiled egg as an analogy. I said, how long does it take to boil a soft boiled egg so that you can dip your soldiers in there, your strips of toast, you can dip them into that nice runny egg. How long would you cook that egg for? And she thought, 4.5 minutes, a very fresh egg, maybe 5. And then I said, okay, you boil that same egg for 15 minutes. Because you spent more time boiling it, is it a better soft-boiled egg? And she said, well, no, it's a hard-boiled egg now. I said, precisely. So 4.5 minutes is the correct time for that egg, not 15. So when it comes to my treatment with an animal, when I've done what I need to do and I've got the positive changes I need, I stop. Because after that, I'm not giving it a better treatment. And she understood that fully, and I went on my way. I've used that analogy several times since, actually, but I don't normally have to. People just trust me to do the right job because they feel the difference in their horse afterwards. I don't have to prove, I don't have to persuade them that I've done a good job. They feel the good job. And when it comes to dogs, you do the right thing. The next time the dog comes in, the dog's actually pushing the door open in front of the owner and coming in, full of it because it likes being there as a genuinely good experience. And no treats involved. It's not coming in for a treat. It's coming in happily because it knows it goes out feeling better. So a dog will come in all over you, jumping around and, very excited. And then when you've done what you need to do, they're just going to sit by the door. You don't have to take it personally. They've taken what they wanted and they're going. And that's the right way that it should be. So the amount of time it takes to treat an animal depends on what you have to do. And I suppose the best thing to do is to explain that to an owner before you start. They're saying, it doesn't always take a long time to create the right change. Animals accept osteopathic manipulation and osteopathic treatment very readily. And because they're less complicated from a social and I don't mean a social, they might be very complicated socially, but from an intellectual and a psychological point of view, they're far less messed up than we are. I don't mean we're all messed up, we probably aren't, but we've got an awful lot more going on, therefore we take a lot more to change, a lot more treatment. We can accept it and we can simply override our instincts to say I've had enough now, and enjoy the contact. But there comes a time when tissue changes and the osteopath can feel the change in the tissue, and that's the moment to stop. If somebody comes up behind you and starts massaging your shoulders and you think, well, that's quite nice, it's the contact that's nice, and they're doing a good job. And then after about 30 seconds, it just starts to irritate a little bit. You don't want to ask them to stop because you appreciate what they're doing. But nevertheless, that point at which the tissue starts to change is when you start to feel that's irritating slightly. Now, an osteopath will feel that happen in the tissue. You feel the changes, you feel the tissue texture alter. So you naturally stop and move on to something else. The same thing happens with animals. Once you've done what you need to do, stop and let the animal go, let the animal decide, and explain to the owner that actually, he's decided. And people will say to you as their animal leaves the table, he's had enough. And then the animal is going to get better. You don't have to persuade the animal or the owner that they're going to get better. They just see the difference and see the change in the animal from week to week. So you don't have to worry about whether you're going to shortchange a client because you've not given the animal very much treatment. You've given the animal what it needed. The animal's indicated that it's had what it needed, and you have, from a welfare point of view, let it go. So you don't have to worry about that one. They've obviously got their own ways of working, and the quality of veterinary care varies just the same as the quality of medicine varies. It might not be a question of a diagnosis or the appropriate treatment. That may be absolutely nailed down. It is out of the question and we can't criticize anyway. But quite often what it comes down to is personality, and what we've got to try and do is to make sure that when we are approaching veterinary practitioners, that we approach them in a professional and an acceptable way, so that we come across as being somebody that they could work with. In many cases, vets these days are very open to osteopathic care, animal osteopathic care of animals, simply because they see the benefit to the animal. And a lot of them, if they really can't find out what's wrong with it, they should be happy enough to have somebody else have a look who can then communicate with them and tell them what they found and whether they think they can do anything about it. The same thing happens in the other direction, that a practitioner may well be having a look at an animal that's been referred, but you found something which perhaps has been missed. And you may well say, look, we'd like some further investigation. So by working in a particular way with the veterinary practices, we can actually become useful to them. And instead of them feeling threatened by our presence and how we're going to be taking work away from them, what we can do is to show them that we can help them build their practice. And there are many practices now that employ osteopaths because they've seen the benefit to their clients. And there's a percentage of that income that comes into that osteopath that goes back to the veterinary practitioner. So actually we can be a pretty good source of work. And then if you're doing a good job in the practice, word of mouth starts to take place, as we were talking about earlier on. And then people are bringing animals into the practice who might not have been coming to that veterinary practice. So we can actually help a vet build a practice by offering a service perhaps that other vets don't. By talking in a way that a vet might understand as being professional is quite useful. We don't tell vets what they should be doing. We make a suggestion and ask them for their thoughts on what we're thinking about. So we're not putting words in their mouth, and we're not threatening their existence by trying to make suggestions that perhaps they've got something wrong. Well, that's never the case. We're all working in the same way that perhaps as an osteopath, another form of approach that could well have helped this animal may well be homeopathy or acupuncture. There are other ways of treating conditions and things, and sometimes it might be a better way of treating. So by being able to make use of other practitioners is very, very useful. The same thing applies to the vet. So, they've got a range of people that they could ask. But when it comes to building a practice and approaching veterinary practices, be open, honest, and professional. And don't try and bullshit people because they see straight through it. Be genuine, be honest, and say that that osteopathy isn't necessarily able to treat everything, but from a structural point of view, it's a pretty good place to start. I mean, one thing that can be challenging in veterinary practice is maybe MRIs and X-rays and things like that, simply because in order for those to happen, a dog or a horse has to have be heavily sedated or even anesthetized. And that presents in itself a difficulty and a potential danger to an animal. So you've got a 10-year-old golden retriever, a 12-year-old Labrador, whatever. I think a vet would say, well, they're a little bit old for that general anesthetic or the heavy sedation. They might not make it back again. So in other words, you may be able to do something for that animal that doesn't require sedation or anesthesia. I mean, I never treat animals under sedation or anesthetic because most of the tissues that you're trying to assess and the findings disappear when the animal is comatose. So you just don't get the feedback from the tissue. So we tend not to work under sedation. So therefore, we're better off with an animal standing there in front of us. Another good reason not to sedate is because an animal might be trying to communicate with you. And a compos mentis animal will go through a series of communications which might escalate, but you can read that, you can work with it. But as soon as you've got an animal, especially a dog, sedated, they might behave in a bizarre manner and things suddenly happen which might be seen inappropriate to the circumstances. And that's simply because the animal cannot communicate naturally. Therefore, you have other things that happen bizarrely. Sedated horses will fall over. You don't sedate them. And if you do sedate them, you've got to hold them up. And, one person pulling on the head, somebody else pulls on the tail. The horse will collapse otherwise. So, there are reasons why we don't necessarily sedate things. So the vets may well sometimes see, or quite often see, the benefit of that. If you've got a lameness in an animal, they've done all their investigations already, we are particularly careful to make sure that we examine the animal from the ground up. Although dogs don't particularly necessarily like having their toes played with, they're very personal to them, and if somebody else is controlling their feet, they can't run away. That's their strongest form of defense. But if you've got a toe which is injured in an animal, making it lame, and that hasn't been looked at, they can X-ray, MRI, do anything, nerve block horses, whatever, to see what's going on. But if you've got something which is so fundamentally inflamed and causing a lameness, and it's low down like that, then of course by highlighting that. You're avoiding the sedation or the anesthetic that the dog was going to have in order to look at the neck or back of the shoulder. So vets understand that. So, by approaching them in a professional way and suggesting the alternatives and how you can help them build a practice, you could be working in their clinic or you could be working in your own, but nevertheless, you've got a relationship with them. You build that relationship and it's very rewarding. The same would apply to farriers or trimmers, whereby you've got an animal that's got problems and they may feel that they can't address all of the biomechanical issues in the distal limb and in the feet because it's going to change the animal so much that it could well be lame. And of course, they'd be blamed for that. But what we're in a position to do is to help the recompensation or the change work through the limb and through the animal by manipulating other things which come under pressure as a result of the change of the foot balance. So we can offer farriers help. Also, you find farriers are struggling to shoe or trim certain horses because the horse refuses to hold its leg up. Now, there's usually a reason for that, either in the back or the limb or perhaps in the opposite limb because they don't want to stand on it. But if we can address the structural issues and make life easier for the farrier so that he can then not get so tired trying to work on that horse, then of course he's likely to offer us other animals to help with as well because it makes life easier for him. Same applies to dog groomers or dog physiotherapists or massage therapists. We're able to help other people where they might be struggling with control or conditions with animals. So connecting with vets is trying to communicate with them and show them that you can be of use to them, because they can be of use to you as well, but you don't necessarily have to talk about that bit. And it does give the opportunity, if you know the vet and can talk to him personally, you can ask him if it's possible to have other investigations because they might be useful. And, that relationship just builds, and the same applies to the same relationship with other practitioners. I'm often asked about where I treat animals. I have my own clinic and all the animals come to me unless I suggest otherwise. It takes such a long time for me to get out to treat dogs in their own home. Horses, obviously, I go to them because I don't expect the owner to put the horse in a lorry and bring it in. And also I can charge a higher fee for that. But when it comes to treating dogs, I prefer to treat them in my space because it's my territory. If I'm going into a dog's house, I'm going into their territory and they can become territorial. Some horses are also territorial in their own stable. And if that's the case, they put them in a different stable or out in the yard and they behave completely differently. But I bring dogs into me simply because I can put them at ease in my clinic. And then next time they realize there's a particular space where they felt good, they like coming there. In other words, there's a benefit for them to be out and about and being seen with me. I can still give the animal the option of approaching me or not, but curiosity usually gets the better of them after a few minutes, and they will make the first approach. First of all, when I'm looking at a dog in my clinic, I'll just leave the dog off the lead, let it free, and I'll be talking to the owner, but I might be sitting at my desk with my back to the owner. Therefore, I'm not interacting as far as the dog's concerned, one-to-one with the owner. Therefore, I'm no threat to the owner, because dogs can feel very, very, very threatened by their owners' proximity to strangers, things like that. So the dog will sniff around the edges of the room. It's quite a big room and there's very little furniture in it, so they've got space to move. But eventually they'll go around and they'll just walk across. If my hand is dangling down by my side, they'll just nudge my hand with their nose. Well, they've now made the first move. So I can now turn around and start talking to the owner. Might even move my chair over closer to the owner. The dog will then come closer to us both, and then we become, not best friends yet, but nevertheless the dog won't mind approaching me a second time. And then I can kneel down, still looking up and talking to the owner. The dog will come up to me, and there we are. We've got that first contact. But that's happened in my space, not in the dog's space. So the rules are different. So I tend to treat dogs in my clinic rather than where they are at home. Also, we have to look at the responsibility of the practitioner, because when you're treating an animal in the UK, I can't talk about law all the way around the world, but the person working with the horse or the dog is actually jointly and severally responsible with the owner for that animal. So if the animal escapes, jumps out of a window, runs across the road, and there's a car accident, the practitioner can be responsible for that. So the idea is to avoid situations like that by having your own space, which you know is safe and secure. The animal can't just walk through one door, has to walk through several to get out. And you can avoid the dog meeting other dogs walking in and walking out. You can control things as they happen. So I prefer to work in my space rather than the animal's home. But that initial assessment can be quite important. The fact that the dog makes the first move and approaches me before I move it, I approach it. So it doesn't feel threatened by me in the slightest. And if it does, then you just, you've got the way of behaving with animals, which we do discuss as part of the course. We avoid that confrontation, and you can modify things as you go, but experience will show you the best way in each circumstance. So once you've got an animal comfortable with you and he's made the first move to approach you rather than you going to it, then you can then start to assess with the animal comfortable with the early assessment. So you apply your techniques in the way that you see fit, and you can organize it. So you're happy to do it, and therefore the animal is usually quite happy as well.